Sometimes you got to lose games to win games. I'll explain next here on Lockdown Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. TCU is 8-4 after the regular season wrapped up on Saturday night in Cincinnati, Ohio. And some tough conditions, snow on the ground, cold weather. Post-game show is up on the YouTube channel. Subscribe there. You can also find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you want to revisit that and get my recap of that game specifically, you can. We'll touch on some of that here in segment one, but we're actually going to talk more big picture here in segment one. In segment two, TCU women's basketball, they're good. They have once again announced their arrival after getting a big win on Friday afternoon over third-ranked Notre Dame, and then following that up with a victory against South Florida on Saturday. And we'll close with some of your thoughts about the Cincinnati game and where this TCU team is moving forward. But I want to start with the team as a whole and kind of where they are going to the bowl game and moving forward. A couple notes. If you missed it, Jack Besh, knee injury, according to Stephen Johnson from Fort Star Telegram. TCU concerned that it might be serious. They're going to evaluate him. No word on what it is yet or how long he'll be out. Obviously, a huge bummer for him from a draft perspective because he'll be getting ready to try to go into the NFL this offseason. But I would also say this eliminates any idea in my mind that he would suit up and play in the bowl game. I thought it wasn't super likely anyway, but I felt like between Jack Besh and Savion Williams, he would be the player that would be more likely to play in the bowl game. I don't foresee that happening now, even if it's less significant than they think. I believe he'll rest, recover, and get ready for the NFL draft. And then Savion Williams, no official word on if he was banged up or not, but one interesting storyline from that ball game, late in the game when they needed to pound the rock and run the ball, they didn't turn to one of the running backs. They turned to Haas Haney at quarterback. And it was quarterback power to the left, to the right, quarterback sweep. They just kept it on the ground with Haas. And they churned off about 4 minutes of clock. And that was a big deal. They didn't score any points, but they got into plus territory, got a couple first downs, and then they were able to punt the ball and pin Cincinnati deep and effectively ice that game away after churning out some yardage and chewing up some clock. So good job by Haas and the offensive line finishing that game on Saturday. But Savion wasn't in his typical Wildcat formation that we've gotten accustomed to in the second half of the season. And I wonder if he was banged up and they said, hey, you know what? We don't want to risk anything, as he's also getting ready to play in the NFL this upcoming year. But bottom line is TCU won. They won 20-13, and they're 8-4 in the regular season. They'll get ready for the bowl game. We'll find out next Sunday where they'll be going. But I've never been in the business since I've been doing this podcast. I say this frequently. I'm not here to tell you how to feel. I give my opinion. You can agree with it or disagree with it, but I'm not in the business of telling people how they should feel, what they should think. It's an open discussion. Yesterday, there was a lot of discussion, and I mentioned in the post-game show, I said, hey, are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you not? How do you feel coming off of this season? And I know the bowl game's still withstanding, and maybe that changes your mind. Unless they just get completely embarrassed, there's nothing really in the bowl game that's going to change my opinion that much. I'm excited to see hopefully some young guys play and just see what the future looks like. But that's my main concern with the upcoming bowl game. As far as what it means for 2025 and what it means for the team, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get a lot of insight from that game specifically. But getting extra practices and getting extra reps for young players is a big deal. But I understand that there are people that are disappointed because, hey, you look at how things broke and how things shook out with the Big 12, and it'll be Arizona State and Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game this week, by the way. If TCU could have held on against UCF, and that's really the game to me. Houston, it stinks that you got beat, but the game wasn't really close. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's just the truth. They had a few chances late. They had a few drives where it was like, all right, if you can go down and score here, it's still a ball game. But it felt like Willie Fritz's team was in control of that game from start to finish. And that was why it was such a low point within the season. Losing to Baylor was rough, but I mean, it was a 3-point loss on the road. It was a game you could have won, though. But if you take 2 of those games and flip the result, then you're playing for Big 12 championship this weekend and a chance at the college football playoff. And I realize we can play that game with the Texas Tech ball game too. And I'm sure a lot of Tech fans are like, man, if we could have just held on against TCU, maybe the season is different. But TCU came back. They won that game by a point, had some big plays on offense, defense stepped up, and they got a dub. But as that Cincinnati game was playing out last night, I started to have this realization, or just this theory. Sometimes you have to lose games to get exposed, to make adjustments, and to get better. Now, there are some situations, I think 2022 is a good example. There were times where TCU played some close games. There were some flaws that became evident, but they still won the ball games. It was ugly against West Virginia at times, but they found a way to win. Kansas State and Oklahoma State, same thing. You're down big, you come back, you win. Bottom line is you survive. And then credit to the coaching staff. They were able to make adjustments even after victories to make the team better. This TCU team, they still have some issues, but they found some ways to work around it. One big issue, they couldn't really run the ball, and they didn't play complementary football very well early in the season. And against UCF, they took a early 28-7 lead, not early in the third quarter. Josh Hooper's Jack Besh on a long touchdown pass. It's 28-7. And I remember during that ball game, after that touchdown, thinking, man, they're going to win. And in the post-game show, I'm going to talk about how they got to find a way to run the ball, but their passing game's elite, and they can make up for it by doing that, and they're still undefeated on the season. Well, that didn't happen. UCF slowly chipped away. TCU settled for a couple field goals in the fourth quarter. Couldn't finish drives. Had a couple 3-and-outs. Didn't chew up the clock. Central Florida went down and won. Then the next week, felt like they had made some adjustments, made some changes. They beat Kansas at Arrowhead Stadium. Then they come back on that Friday against Houston and lose. And they had turnovers, and they had silly penalties, and they didn't show up to play that night. And going into the bye week, they looked like a mess. And they still couldn't run the ball after the Houston game. But sometimes you have to lose games to figure out what you're not good at and then make those changes. So before they played Utah, TCU decided, you know what? We got a big wide receiver, big physical wide receiver in Savion Williams. He used to play quarterback in high school. He's good with the ball in his hands. Why don't we give him a chance to run the ball? And it didn't show up a lot on the scoreboard that night in that 13-7 victory against the Utes. And yeah, that was more about the defense, and it was more about Cam Rising being hurt and Isaac Wilson not being very good. But that night, they played complimentary ball. They forced a few turnovers. They were able to chew up some clock and get some first downs by running the ball. And that, it changed the season. It did. It gave them more balance on offense. And suddenly they followed that up with a few wins against teams that, yeah, they probably should have beat. But they blew out Oklahoma State and Arizona. And I don't think those would have been blowouts early in the year. And if they survive that game against UCF, let's say Remington Strickland doesn't jump at the goal line, the 2-yard line or the 1-yard line, whatever it was, when they had 3rd and goal from the 1, and they punch it in, and they go on to win that game, and they're 3-0, and all the vibes are high. They probably still get shell-shocked by SMU. I didn't even talk about the SMU game because that, it was never a game. But again, some of the same mistakes were there. They turned the ball over. They had silly penalties. Defense looked lost. But they took those lessons and they learned from it, and they got better. And maybe if they survive the UCF game and they win the Houston game, it's easy for us to say, oh, they'd be playing the Big 12 championship. Well, we think so, but possibly they lose to Utah, or possibly they lose, somewhere else down the line. Because they don't adjust, because they still play the same way, because they're still turning the ball over, or they're still not able to run the ball, and they don't make the necessary adjustments they needed to get better as a team, because they just felt like, well, hey, we're still winning. There's no need to. Now, the key to this is, if that's the case, how do you build on it next year? You've learned some things. And next year, you're going to have a different team, but you'll have a lot of the same core. How do you instill those values and make sure that those things that you were deficient at this season improve? That's the big question for the coaching staff. That's what they have to figure out. How do you get this offensive line to take the next step so they're opening up holes for these running backs? How do you get your running backs in a place where they're more decisive, which I think Cam Cook has been the last few weeks, and they're getting more positive yards on first and second downs, so you're not asking Josh Hoover to live in 3rd and 10 and 3rd and 12 and 3rd and 13 as much as he was this year? How do you build on the momentum defensively and get some more talent there around some of the guys that you love, like the Deal brothers? Those are the keys going into this offseason. And yes, I feel like two things can be true. You can understand and appreciate the changes that were made in the middle of the year and how it benefited the team, but also say, man, if we could just had our head on straight 3 weeks earlier, there were some opportunities to be had. So it's simultaneously a missed opportunity, and you got to give them credit for what they changed and what they did. But I'm just throwing this out there. Sometimes setbacks are helpful, and it's the only way to really bring the necessary change to get better. So they found a way to do that. Also, yeah, the schedule did get more manageable. But you know what? UCF's 4-8. You lost at home to that team. That's a team you probably beat if you played them on Saturday. But you didn't. And you learned from it. Yeah, we can be disappointed about maybe where they are and say, I feel like we should be further along in the journey here with progress and with consistency. But also understand and appreciate that this team got better. And when it looked like maybe they were going to throw in the towel, they found a way to get back up off the mat and win some critical ball games. TCU's 8-4. Football season is not coming to an end. We got plenty to talk about. Signing days this week, so hang with me. We got signing day on Wednesday. We got bowl games to talk about. We have plenty of off-season news and notes. Transfer portal will be here before you know it. Along with that, basketball is in full swing. And these two programs, the men and the women, they're going in different directions right now. We'll talk about it next year on Lockdown Horned Frogs, your team every day. Are you somebody who sits there and watches NFL Red Zone each and every week? I'll be honest with you. Sunday's kind of become my one day to not be locked in on sports. So usually I'm kind of doing stuff around the house, prepping for the week of the podcast, prepping for work for the week, whatever. But if that's your thing, no shame here. I love it. I love football. I like watching the Cowboys. Not really right now, but historically, I root for them. Historically, I guess I don't really like watching them either because they haven't won much in my lifetime. I root for the Dallas Cowboys. That's a better way to put it. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. You can bet on the NFL. One $5 bet. You win that, you get $150 in bonus bets. You can also wager on college football, college basketball, NHL. It's all there. It's a great time to be a sports fan. NBA is in full swing also. Give FanDuel a try. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. FanDuel, official betting partner of the National Football League, and also a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. TCU women's basketball is good. That's my expert opinion. That's my take. I thought this team could be good. I was really intrigued by the pieces they put together. They brought in Haley Van Lith. They had Sedona Prince and Madison Connor returning. Some of the big transfers they brought in, like Maddie Shear, haven't even played yet. She's reportedly dealing with a back injury. Not sure what her timetable is. But Mark Campbell has done a fantastic job infusing talent into this roster, and they have come together as a team really quickly. Taylor Bigby, also from USC, she's been great. Donovan Hunter is a great defensive player and can shoot it as well. They went down to the Cayman Islands on Friday, and they already pulled off one big upset against NC State at home. That was a nice win. But if you follow women's college basketball closely, that was a big deal. That puts you in the top 25. And I was looking for the AP poll before I started recording segment 2 here. I'm recording on a Sunday afternoon. Hadn't dropped yet. I imagine there's a decent chance TCU could be in the top 10, at least top 15. But that puts you in the top 25, beating NC State. You're going to have the Cayman Islands to play Notre Dame, number 3 team in the country. And historically, in this sport, there's been a huge drop-off between like the top 3 or 4 teams and everybody else. You've seen some dominant runs, whether it was UConn, Baylor at times, South Carolina now. Obviously, Iowa's really great with Caitlin Clark, but even they couldn't find a way to win a national title because they ran up against some great teams in LSU and South Carolina, respectively. So I didn't expect them to win on Friday afternoon, just to be honest about it. I thought if they were able to stay competitive in that ball game and hang around, then that would be good for their confidence. It would be another good learning experience. Well, they won. They won 76-68, and they had a huge run in the second half to do it. They were down by 10 at the end of the first quarter, 6 at halftime. Then at the end of the third quarter, they're down by 11 points, and Haley Van Lith and Sedona Prince took over. Sedona had an incredible game, 20 points and 20 rebounds, and she played all 40 minutes, 9 of 17 from the field. Van Lith, 8 of 15 from the field, 21 points. Was 0 of 3 from 3, but still had a great night, and she had 7 assists. Continues to be a great playmaker. That was something they focused on. When she got here, one thing everybody talked about was this is her chance to kind of cement her status as a WNBA prospect, and that she wanted to get back to what she was doing at Louisville, which was being a point guard who could go get buckets, who could go score. And she's shown that, but she's also shown an ability to pass the ball and use the gravity of the defense that's going to come to her and try to, bring a lot of attention to her scoring ability and then get good shots to other players. And she's done that at a high level so far this season. But to beat number 3 Notre Dame, that's a huge statement. I mean, this team you've got a couple holdovers from last year, but the majority of production is coming from transfer players. And yes, they have talent, but they just took down one of the best teams in the country on a neutral site. Just an incredible performance. Taylor Bigby hit a big 3 to give them a 4-point lead in that ball game. They hit the free throws. They only shot 28% from 3 against Notre Dame. So it wasn't like, oh man, they were just hot from deep and just poured it on that way. No, I mean, they're legitimately playing good defense, playing good basketball, and winning these ball games. They followed that up with an 87-46 win against South Florida to win the tournament. And Sedona Prince, another good night, 17 points, 13 boards. Haley Van Lith, 23 points. It's crazy to me how much better Sedona is. And I believe having real scoring threats at the guard position is a huge part of that. She had Madison Connor last year, but I think the big difference with Van Lith is she has the ball in her hands so much. Connor is more of a spot-up shooter. She's also benefited from being off the ball and being able to get good looks based on the attention that other players are getting. But the two-person game that they get to play in the pick and roll or pick and pop with Sedona and Haley is really special. And I remember after last year, when Sedona announced she was coming back, I was like, well, that's big. She was obviously good, but there were times where I just felt like she was taking way too many fadeaway jumpers. She wasn't really asserting herself like I thought she should. And she's doing it now on both ends of the floor because she also blocks a lot of shots. I think she had 7 blocks against Notre Dame. The only thing I'll say about this team, and not that I'm necessarily concerned about it, I just feel like it's something to watch. Sedona played 40 minutes against Notre Dame. Madison Connor played 37. Bigby played 38. Van Lith played 33. Now, they had more depth and more rotation against South Florida, but I think a lot of that was due to the fact they had such a big lead. It's pretty clear Mark Campbell is like, hey, we got to play our starting 5 as long as possible. And I just wonder, the deeper you get into the year, how much does fatigue set in, and can you really function at that high of a level if you're still only 6 or 7 players deep? But, I mean, that's really my only, not even complaint, just like something to watch as they move forward through the season. They play Florida Atlantic on Wednesday, and then they get South Carolina. And that's their last big test before Big 12 play starts. South Carolina, before this most recent AP poll, which is apparently not going to come out before I get done recording here, but they're number 4 in the country. And they've been the bully that everyone has been chasing for the last couple of seasons. So another chance for this squad to show what they can do. And that game will be at Dickies Arena, 6 o'clock Sunday night. Should be fun to watch. But I've been blown away with how quickly this team has just improved and has developed team chemistry in such a short amount of time. On the other side, the men's team, woof. They took 2 L's this weekend in their holiday tournament. They got destroyed by Santa Clara, 69-52, 1 of 17 from 3 on that night, and then lost in overtime to Colorado State, 76-72. They're now 4-3 on the season, and they just got beat by 2 group of 5 teams by a pretty wide margin against Santa Clara. Colorado State took a lead there with about a minute left. Noah Reynolds hit a 3. And then Brandon Winslow took up a free throw, so they're up 3. But then Rams answered with a 3 to tie it, and they couldn't get anything going in the overtime period. This has kind of been, I guess if you're going to keep it positive, which I'm not very positive on this team right now, this has been a theme with Jamie's teams lately, especially his transfer-heavy squads. They'll have some, what-the-heck losses. But this is becoming too frequent, and, at least in the case of Santa Clara, they just got destroyed. So I don't know where the help is coming from. They don't have a great offensive team. They don't really have a go-to scorer. I think Frankie Collins was their best player overall, but he was supposed to be, here at TCU, his role was supposed to be like true point guard distributor. Instead, they're leaning on him to score a lot. And I don't think that was planned. I just think it's out of necessity. So not great vibes right now for the men's team, and conference play is not going to be kind to them if they can't figure it out. Their next ball game will be Thursday against Xavier. It's number 22 in the country. Then they get Vandy on Sunday. So more Power 5 teams coming down the pipe here. And they weren't even Power 5 teams they were playing this weekend. They just took some L's. When we come back, we'll get some of your thoughts about the Cincinnati game. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team. We do it here every day. If you need tickets to that game at Dickies Arena between TCU and South Carolina, another big chance for the TCU women to show what they can do. You can do it on the Gametime app. Gametime is the best place to get secondary tickets. They got tickets for that ball game for as low as $30 on the Gametime app. I make it easy for you. The tickets, go straight to your phone. You don't have to wonder where they are. They show you the view of what you're going to see from your seat when you sit down. And there's also no hidden fees. There's some fees, but they tell you exactly what they are up front. Download the Gametime app today. Use the promo code. Let me pull up the overlay here if you're watching on YouTube so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. The promo code is Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Again, it's Locked On College. You get $20 off your first purchase. Gametime. Give it a try today. All right, so Frogs beat Cincinnati 20-13 in that snowstorm West Coast Johnny on YouTube says Frogs had a good year, but need to address a few issues. When your best running options are a wide receiver and your backup quarterback, you need to upgrade your running backs. Kyle Limmerman was bad at times this year, didn't look like a D1 kicker. Need to improve the O-line. He also thinks that Hoover is a long-term starter. They got to make some adjustments in their scheme, considering so much of the Briles offense is predicated on the quarterback being a dual threat. And Josh, to this point in his career, has not been that. Well, I love all those thoughts. I mean, a couple things in response. I think they got to get better on the O-line. I feel like they're going to be banking on continuity there more than anything else. I would like to see them out of tackle. I don't know what their thought process is in that particular position group. Kyle Limmerman, I feel like you got to give him some time to grow here. I saw some people saying yesterday he's at the transfer portal. I've been surprised at how much he struggled. I thought the transition to being a kicker in college was much smoother, but he's talented. If you want to bring somebody in for some competition next year, I'm not against that, but I think they're going to give him some time to figure this out. And then scheme-wise, I don't know. It's fascinating. I feel like the offense was played at a high level for the most part. Yesterday was tough, but I think a lot of that was just the conditions they were playing in the second half. Josh has a live arm. Now, the biggest issue is you got to replace a ton of production at receiver, and this receiver group is special. I mean, when you're talking about like J.P. Richardson and Eric McAllister, you're 3 and 4 guys at that spot. I mean, those dudes would be leading receivers at a lot of schools in the Big 12. So they're going to figure that out, and that could be tricky and challenging. But overall, I agree with you. Changes, there are going to be some changes coming, but I think a lot of the improvement next year, they're hoping on continuity more than actual like wholesale changes within the program, within the personnel. Byron says 8 and 4 could have easily been 10 and 2. Go Frogs. And that kind of goes back to what I talked about in segment 1. It feels like you missed some opportunities, but also I think those games were necessary to get to the turnaround. And sometimes you have to go through that to get where you need to go. And then finally, one user said 8 and 4 is still a big improvement from last season. Glad the team stepped up after the rough start. Also, I got to see Haas Haney play in person. Excited for his future with us. I am too. I hope Haas gets to throw the ball around a little bit in the bowl game. And that's the only thing I'm like, if you have him out there as your running threat, like let him throw the ball and get some of these wide receivers. So hopefully we see that. And we'll see what their plans with him are next year. I mean, it's obvious that they trust him in these situations running the ball. And there's a lot of different cool and creative things you could do with an offseason to prep and get ready, along with having Josh Hoover as your lead quarterback. So a lot of fascinating storylines coming here over the next few months that I'm excited to talk about. We'll also, of course, have plenty of basketball coverage, and signing day is coming up soon. So don't check out on us. Still a lot to talk about here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.